I recently covered the chipset architectures and the difference between the AMD Socket AM5 boards and their B650 and X670 chipsets, and I want to do the same for the Raptor Lake offerings, the 13th gen release from Intel. I will be going deeper into the I/O bandwidth and what additional value you get from choosing the Z790 over the B760. This is not a focus on specific boards, but I will be using example boards from MSI to make this more real and to make the chipset offerings relatable. What I'm really focused on is the PCIe lane connectivity and I/O bandwidth you get from each chipset and how this is implemented on a range of boards. This is so you can really see the performance benefits you could actually get from spending significantly more on a middle or high-end board and not buying a budget board. Board vendors are always motivated to upsell you to a higher board, and this is where the most profit and revenue is generated, so let's separate the reality from the board graphics, branding and LEDs and see if it really makes sense. Before we get into the boards, a quick look at the architecture diagram, and we can see that PCIe 5 is presented to the CPU directly, and the majority of the connectivity is provided through the chipset over either a 4 or 8x direct memory interface. These are effectively PCIe lanes that carry data between the CPU and the chipset. Looking at a comparison of the chipsets themselves, firstly, there are very few boards with the H770 chipset. Asus has a couple, but other vendors including MSI have just chosen not to provide one, so this leaves the primary options as the B760 and the Z790. Both chipsets offer 16 lanes of PCIe 5 to the CPU, usually used for a GPU, and a further 4 lanes of PCIe 4, usually for storage. The B760 offers 4 Gen 4 DMI lanes to the chipset, with the Z790 offering 8 for twice as much bandwidth. The Z790 provides more bandwidth from interface to the chipset also, with 20 PCIe Gen 4 lanes and 8 Gen 3 lanes. That's twice that of the B760's 10 and 4 lanes respectively. The Z790 also has more bandwidth for other connectivity like USB, but both chipsets offer multiple 5, 10 or 20GB USB access. It is also worth noting that the connectivity is very similar to the Alder Lake boards using the B660 and Z790 chipsets, with the main change being that some of the chipsets' Gen 3 lanes have been upgraded to Gen 4, but the DMI access to the socket is the same. So with that done, let's put into practice with some boards, looking at examples from MSI and see how this plays out with interface availability and speed. MSI segments their boards into 3 main gaming categories, as well as a pro range. For this example, we will pick boards from each of their gaming categories ranging from their lower price MAG range to their top of the line MEG Godlike board. First of all, we notice that the B760 board is really primarily only available in their MAG lineup, and we are picking the B760 Tomahawk Wi-Fi board priced at $190 currently on Newegg, discounted from about $210. We're going to stick with the DDR5 base boards for all the comparisons, but this video won't focus on memory performance specifically. The fact that the choice of gaming focused B760 boards is small already tells us that MSI wants to push high-end chipsets to gamers. They do offer 8 Pro boards with the B760 chipset, but the gaming boards are a mix of MAG Tomahawk ATX and MAG Mortar Micro ATX boards. They do offer one MPG series board based on a Mini ITX in the Edge, but that's it. The Mini ITX board there is really small, so there's limited I/O there to justify the Z790 chipset. We will then look at the B760 Tomahawk sibling board, the Z790 Tomahawk, which is currently $240 on Newegg, reduced from about $290. This allows us to directly compare between 2 very similar boards with the 2 different Raptor Lake chipsets. Next, we pick the MPG Z790 Edge ATX board, retailing at $370 at the time of making on Newegg, and this is a middle-of-the-range Z790 board. And finally, we look at the MEG Z790 Godlike, which at $1,200 is a very expensive board. Does it offer any meaningful connectivity advantages to justify that price tag? Okay, starting with the B760, which is priced at $190. First of all, we can see that there are 16 lanes of PCIe 5 connectivity directly from the socket to the PCIe 16X primary slot, most often used for the GPU. In addition, there's a direct connection from the CPU to the first M.2 slot based on a 4-lane PCIe 4 connection. This would be used for highest bandwidth disk to remove that load from the chipset. As we will see, Raptor Lake only offers 16 lanes of PCIe 5 connectivity to the socket, so there are no lanes left here for M.2 storage, and most of the boards we see won't allow you to bifurcate those lanes, e.g. share them between devices even if you wanted to. Next, we see the connectivity from the socket to the B760 chipset itself, and this is provided over a 4x DMI4 connection, meaning 4 PCIe 4 lanes are available for a total of just under 8GB per second bidirectionally between the chipset and the socket. And this is the same as the B660 chipset from Alder Lake, And it's also the same bandwidth as the AMD AM5 architecture provides, and would be shared by all resources connected via the chipset to talk to the CPU. From the chipset, we see connections to 2 further M.2 slots running at 4x PCIe 4 for just under 8GB per second each. 2 is the practical limit here due to the chipset only providing 10 lanes of PCIe 4. There is also a 16x slot that provides 4 lanes of PCIe 3 connectivity and a PCIe 4 1x slot also, and these two consume almost all the remaining lane availability on the chipset. This board also provides 4 SATA 6 gigabits per second connections, which is at most 2.4 gigabytes in total in both directions. So there are a total of 2 M.2 slots, the 2 primary PCI slots, and the SATA connectivity all sharing that 4-lane DMI connection to the socket, which in reality is unlikely to be a bottleneck given the high performance requirements that are typically dealt with on the CPU directly. Now let's compare this to the equivalent Tomahawk board with the Z790 chipset and see how they differ. The Z790 version of the board is currently priced at $240, discounted from $290, so it's a $50 premium and a 26% price uplift. For direct CPU connectivity, it's the same as the B760. It has PCIe 5 16-lane primary slot and a 4-lane PCIe 4 connection for M.2 storage. This means that there isn't a performance benefit for direct to CPU connectivity for GPU and storage over its B760 sibling. Where the Z790 does offer a benefit, however, is with twice the bandwidth to the chipset, with an 8-lane Gen 4 PCIe connection for a little over 16 gigabytes per second bidirectionally. Also twice the chipset uplink as that of the AMD B650 and X670 boards, though consider for most users this will not be a bottleneck, the exception being if you're running many fast M.2 NVMe devices and using them at high bandwidth for extended periods, which I would say is fairly niche. Given the extra lane availability on the chipset, an additional M.2 slot running at PCIe 4 speeds is provided here, taking the number of M.2 from 3 to 4 on this board. In terms of other connectivity, the second 16x slot, which actually only has 4 lanes, is moved from being PCIe 3 to a Gen 4 slot, a change from just under 4 gigabytes per second to just under 8. Most users probably won't populate this slot, and if they do, the importance here will depend on what will go in it. It's unlikely to be a key consideration. The remaining 1x slot moves from a Gen 4 lane on the B760 to a Gen 3 lane on the Z790. The Z790 boards provide up to 7 SATA 6 gigabits per second interfaces, and increase from 4 on the Tomahawk B760 if you need this many SATA drives, but 2 of those 3 additional SATA ports are not on the chipset and are connected via an ASM 1061 controller. There are also some slight variations, such as the audio codec, which goes from a Realtek ALC 897 on the B760 to an ALC 4080 on the Z790 board. But I would say this isn't a big shift, and if the difference between these two is important to you, then an external DAC is probably a better choice, rendering this moot. You also get one extra fan header increase from 5 to 6. The big change here is that Intel unlocked the feature to overclock your CPU on this chipset, though memory overclocking is going to be available on both. Next, we look at the MPG Z790 Edge, which is the next product tier, priced at $370, which is a 54% increase on the Tomahawk Z790, or $130 in this case. So it is a considerable price step. And interestingly, from a connectivity perspective, it's almost indistinguishable from the Tomahawk. It has 16-lane PCIe primary slot and the 4x Gen 4 M.2 slot from the CPU, as do all the boards today. It has the same 8-lane PCIe DMI connection to the chipset as expected, but it does come with one extra M.2 slot connected to the chipset, providing a total of 5 M.2 compared to the 4 from the Tomahawk. It also has the same PCIe slot options as the Tomahawk, with a PCIe 4 4-lane 16x socket and a PCIe 3 1x slot. And again, all the additional connectivity, including codecs, networking, USB, SATA, etc., is the same as the Tomahawk board. In fact, looking at the board's component layout, they are based on the same PCB, and it looks like the power stage implementation is the same also. So, where the extra $130 is going, it isn't clear to me. Maybe it's on white plastic. I assume, in fact, that the color aesthetic is the main justification for the price hike. And finally, let's focus on the top of the line MEG Z790 Godlike board, coming in at an eye-watering $1,200. What is on this board that justifies the price tag? So MSI marks this board on their website as hot, implying that it's selling fast. So let's dig into what this means from a user experience perspective. Again, it provides a 16-lane Gen 5 connection to the primary PCIe socket and a 4-lane Gen 4 connection to the first M.2, the same as all the other boards. However, it extends those same Gen 5 lanes down to the second PCIe slot and onto the fourth M.2 slot also. So, notionally, you could put 2 Gen 5 GPUs in this board And in fact, it provides an additional 6-pin PCIe power socket on the main board so that you could do this safely. However, there are no Gen 5 PCI graphics cards currently, and even when there is, putting 2 on this is not likely to ever make sense. In fact, it's important to know that when you do use that second slot, because there are only 16 Gen 5 lanes on the CPU, those lanes would be bifurcated and each socket would become 8 lanes each. In addition, using that PCIe 5 capable M.2 slot also bifurcates the lanes and reducing the primary slot to 8 lanes and disabling the second PCIe slot entirely. So given that fast M.2 storage would be beneficial for gaming, but that doing so halves your GPU's available bandwidth, even if it's Gen 4, seems contradictory. And yes, it's true that most workloads for the GPU don't exceed needing an 8-lane interface, and if there was one that would, it would be using high-speed Gen 5 NVMe storage, so all of this feels pretty pointless and unusable. Maybe the Gen 5 storage is useful for content creators, but this clearly is not a board designed for content creators, so I think that's irrelevant. Moving on, the connection to the chipset is the same as the other Z790 boards, so 8 PCIe DMI lanes for 16GB of bandwidth from the socket to the chipset. Then there is 4 PCIe M.2 slots with 4 lanes each, and a Gen 3 M.2 slot also in slot M2_5. So the board provides a total of 7 M.2 slots, one of which isn't practical to use as it bifurcates the GPU slot. There is another that will reduce your SATA options to only 2, and those provided by the ASM 1061 chipset and not the Intel chipset. But unless you need 6 NVMe cards installed, that storage capacity isn't going to be a good cost justification. The board does provide Thunderbolt 4, which isn't an option on the other boards, and does provide up to 40 gigabits per second connectivity. So again, this is a nice addition if it's needed, but all the other boards provide USB 3.2 Gen 2 for 20 gigabytes, even the B760 board. So from a connectivity perspective, there are some nice additions, but I don't think anything that could justify the price tag for all except the biggest enthusiasts. Also, for some reason, there's no iGPU support. So I realise gamers would always use a discrete GPU for gaming, but it is a useful feature for troubleshooting and setting up, which seems oddly missing from such a board. However, the board does provide a lot of other features which are more related to setting up system and tinkering. It provides good tooling for overclocking, lots of headers for fans and pumps, and a rather unnecessary external touchscreen for monitoring and customizing your rig. So, not to say you shouldn't buy this board, but go into it with your eyes open and know what you are getting for your money and if that provides you value. If you adore your rig and you love to tinker and optimize it and you have the cash to spend, maybe this is the board for you. So let's talk conclusions. Looks like for the majority of gamers, the Tomahawk B760 board will actually do everything that is needed and at a price point below $200. It provides the Gen 5 GPU slot, which actually isn't needed. Dedicated Gen 5 connectivity to an M.2 slot would probably be more useful, but that is true on all the way up to the Godlike board. It provides 3 M.2 slots running at Gen 4 speeds, which should satisfy most needs, and it provides the same CPU and memory support as the higher boards and still allows for XMP profiles for memory overclocking. The main thing it lacks is support for CPU overclocking, which, for the majority of people, probably isn't going to be a showstopper. But if you do want to be able to overclock your CPU, you can move to the Tomahawk Z790 board, which gives you this, but also provides one additional M.2 slot for a total of 4 NVMe drives. And this is for additional $50, which is probably fair value, and the reason that this is such a popular board. After that, I really don't see the value in stumping up the extra $130 for the Edge board unless it absolutely has to be white. And the Godlike board seems to offer a lot of things that most people don't need and certainly couldn't justify an uplift of nearly $1,000 over the Tomahawk Z790. The Godlike board may suit some, but you have to really want what it offers and have the $1,000 in your pocket to satisfy that. But overall, the Intel Z790 does offer a bit more over the B760 than the AMD X670 does over the B650. Better chipset connectivity on the Z790 is real, whereas the limitation on overclocking for the B760 seems to be an artificial feature disablement to force upsells. AMD doesn't do this with its feature, and it makes the B650 a far clearer choice for many if they're choosing AMD. I am sure Intel's tack here is intentional for these reasons. And as for PCIe Gen 5, right now there are no Gen 5 GPUs, nor will there be anytime soon, and even when they are, the likely driver for high-speed GPU bus speed is going to be direct storage and super fast Gen 5 NVMe's, which you can't have on these boards. So again, and much like the AMD boards, the Gen 5 offerings here seem to be more for show than go, and it will probably be another generation or so before Gen 5 really becomes compelling. So please like if this was useful. I really appreciate this and it helps get reach and grow the channel. If you like the content, I have more which you can see here, and you can subscribe and click the bell if you want to get notified when I release more content. Also, please let me know what you think about the Intel board offerings and the differences between the chipsets they provide. I always love to see your feedback, and I'm interested in your take on the AMD segmentation versus Intel's on this chipset. So thank you for watching to the end, and I will see you in the next.